So welcome to this morning, November 7th. I'm going to be passing things off to Tracy Cook. I'm Joe Flick with the Montana State Library, and Tracy's presenting today on the job of the library board. So Tracy, I'll go ahead and send things off to you.
All right, thank you, Joe. And I see a lot of new names on here, which is pretty exciting. I'm glad to see that some of you are able to join us.
We see your screen
and
just
can everyone
fine, Tracy.
see?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I will introduce myself just in a little bit more detail since I do have so many new names on here. I am a consultant for the State Library, and I work with libraries primarily in western Montana. It's actually really hard to describe my region. There are 3 of us at the State Library, and basically we are someone that library directors or trustees can call if they have a question or they need assistance with some particular project that they're working on. Over the years that I have been at the State Library, I've always been very interested in library boards and what they do, and so early on in my career I started working with them. And this particular session that I'm doing is one that I actually have done face-to-face with different library boards. That is something that the consultants will offer you, and I'm pretty excited to try it as a webinar version. I'm hoping that I can get you to participate in the chat. I am someone who, I don't actually really like lecturing people. I really like to have interactivity, because one of the things that's so exciting to me about teaching adults is that everybody brings some experience and knowledge to the table and we can all learn. And even though some of you may be fairly new to the library board, you may have other board experience, and all of that can be used on the library board as well, even if they are somewhat unique in how they work. I also want to encourage you to ask questions whenever you have them, and you can use the chat box, and you can also send them to me. I'm relatively new to the webinar world, so I might not see it right away, but I will certainly try to get back to you as soon as I can. So let me go ahead and talk about my outline. And while I am doing this, I was wondering, Joe, if you could do a poll just asking people how long they've been a board member or a library director. I think we have at least one library director on this particular webinar. I'd just like to get a sense for my own sake how much experience you have on the library board. That way I sort of can tailor this webinar to be most useful to you.
And
while Joe is sending that out, okay. All right, and while Joe is doing that, I'll just kind of quickly run through that outline. We are going to play the acronym game. This is probably my #1 request from trustees, is that we use a lot of acronyms in the library world, and so we're going to take a look at some of those. I'm going to briefly talk about resources for trustees, and then we're going to get into kind of the heart of this, which is talking about the job of the library board and the roles of individual trustees, boards, and directors. And then finally, I'm hoping some of you did get the homework assignment and were able to take a look at the golden rules for board members. And we'll just take a few moments to kind of talk about those and what you thought of them, what you might take away, what you might add. And so just in looking at the chat thing, it looks like we have a lot of new trustees on here. So that's pretty exciting to see the list.
Oh, everybody's using the chat box, so I won't launch a poll. That's great. So just
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead in the chat box and just tell us how many years you've been serving in a leadership role at your library. So got some real newbies and some. Okay, just a couple months. Great. 15 years. Ron will be referring all questions to you.
Yes.
Terrific.
All
well, that's working great.
Great, thank you. This is good. And I'm hoping that my more experienced trustees, I hope that you'll share what you've learned over the years. That's one of the things I am hoping comes out of this webinar, is just people get a chance to meet each other, even if it's electronically, and to connect with one another and have some people you can ask questions of as we go through this.
And when we set this up as a 3-part course, we really hope that you would all get to know each other. That's why we're going to be using that chat box a lot. You should get to know each other a little bit over the course of the 3 sessions.
All right, so I am going to go ahead and get back to my PowerPoint. And the way I would like to play the acronym game is I am actually going to make this a regular Microsoft PowerPoint thing, because what I am hoping you will do is use the chat box to tell me what each of these acronyms stands for. And then in the interest of time, I'll kind of talk about each one in a little bit more detail. You're kind of lucky, actually. In my face-to-face sessions, I make the attendees tell me not only what the acronym stands for, but what that institution does. So I'm going to let you off the hook a little bit here. But let's go ahead and start with the first one. So what does MSL stand for? I know I have a bracelet. Yay! It is Montana State Library. And basically, the Montana State Library was created in the early 20th century. And our job is to provide leadership for public libraries, to support them, and also to send you money, and then to provide training and other opportunities as well. The State Library actually has several divisions, though, that do much more than that, and over the years our responsibilities have grown. Many of you might meet people such as myself who work for the Library Development Office. We are the consultants who go out directly to help you or assist you with projects. We also have people like Joe who facilitate training, and Joe now also handles the continuing education credits. We have Kara, who's our statewide projects librarian. So if your librarians ever say, we're going to join Montana Library to Go or OCLC or something like that, Kara is someone you'll come across. And then we have the Montana Shared Catalog staff, who I'll be talking about in just a few moments. In addition, though, to those of us at the State Library who work directly with public libraries, the State Library also has a library piece, and the library supports state government employees. And then we also have a natural resource information systems and natural heritage program, and they are kind of our scientists. They take care of mapping. The natural heritage program does a lot of research on botany or wildlife in Montana, doing a fair number of reports and things like that. And then the State Library has the Talking Book Library, which provides services for those who are blind or visually impaired, or who even may just have reading disabilities. So any questions about the State Library before I go on to the other one? And Joe, I'll it looks like Patricia's having some audio-visual problems.
The voices are garbled. You may have a slow internet connection, and one of the options would be to click on your mic and speaker settings and change to the phone setting. And it's a long-distance call, however, but you might find it's easier to listen on the phone if the voice is really hard to understand. Okay, Patricia?
Okay. And it looks like Judy actually answered the second one as well, which is the Montana Library Association. And the Montana Library Association is a nonprofit organization dedicated to libraries, all types of libraries. Anyone who loves libraries, is a staff member or a trustee, can join the Montana Library Association. They provide a fair number of continuing education opportunities through things like their annual conference and some mini retreats they have throughout the year. The other thing the Library Association does for us in Montana is they provide assistance with kind of the legislature. So during legislative sessions, if there are bills that are really favorable to libraries, they'll testify for them. They'll round up people to convince their legislators to support the bill. If there's a bill in session that's kind of not good for libraries, they'll also speak out against that. So they are able to do some of that work that the State Library cannot do, since we are a part of the Montana government. All right, so IL, as Joe likes to say. Does anyone know what ILL stands for?
You have a winner.
You can just, do we have one?
Yep.
Oh, aha, I see it. Yes, that's correct. Okay, I had to scroll down in my chat box here. It is interlibrary loan. interlibrary loan is basically libraries sharing books with one another. And it's typically thought of as two independent libraries sharing their materials with one another. So for instance, I can go down to my local Belt Public Library, and for my job I often need kind of some more academic types of books than the Belt Public Library is going to have. And so Gladys, my library director, will order the books for me from, say, the University of Montana or whatever. It's a really great way for providing a service for your patrons who may sometimes have special needs that it wouldn't make sense for your library to order those particular books. So here's a good one. This is one that I find trustees have heard a lot, but they actually may not know what it is. Does anyone know what OCLC stands for? And this is a tricky one, so I will actually, oh yes, Sean, awesome. It is Online Computer Library Center. To be honest, their official name I think isn't as helpful as knowing that sometimes, those of you who are new, may have your library director say we need to pay our OCLC bill. And this is a nonprofit company that provides the software that libraries use behind the scenes. So libraries will use their software for things like interlibrary loan or cataloging. The company will also do research on the future of libraries and people's perceptions of libraries. One of the most interesting studies I've ever read is called From Awareness to Funding, and it was created by OCLC. And it talks about basically how you get people to vote yes on mill levies. And it's a very good study. If you are interested in seeing a link for that, just send me an email or let me know via chat, and I will send you the link to that particular study. It's a great example, though, of some of the research that this nonprofit company is able to do for us because they have the staff and the time and the money to do that. But in Montana, primarily, the library directors are using OCLC software to catalog items or to provide interlibrary loan, or in some cases to provide reference assistance and things like that. Okay, MSC. So I know what that stands for? Yes, thanks, Kathy. It is the Montana Shared Catalog. And in Montana, there are now about 150 libraries of all types, public, school, special, academic, who are a part of this group called the Montana Shared Catalog. It's a consortium of libraries that have pulled their money together to buy a really robust automation system. You know, for many of them on their own individually, they could really only afford what I say is kind of like the Chevy of an automation system, but by pulling their money together with other libraries, they can actually get a Cadillac. And in addition to being able to have this more robust automation system, this group networks together a lot of time. They have been able to share their experience and expertise, and they've also found that as many of our resources become more electronic, it's easier for them to take advantage of things like Montana Library to Go or the databases some of you might have heard of the auto repair manual, the medical databases and things like that. So BTOP, this is one that's actually going away, but I think you're going to hear about it. So does anyone know what this stands for? And thank you, Joe, for posting the link to the From Awareness to Funding. Yes. It is the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program. And out of curiosity, while I'm kind of talking about this one, how many of you is your library a beneficiary of the BTOP program, the Broadband Technologies Program? And you can just indicate that in chat. For those of you who might not be aware, this was a federal grant that the state library was able to receive about 2.5 years ago. We are in basically the final year of this particular grant process. And basically what it did was for about half of our public libraries, we were able to update their computer centers. For some of them, we were able to give them faster internet connections. We also were able to purchase what we call technology petting zoos. Essentially, this was just a little electronic box of goodies that had things like e-readers and iPads and some other mobile devices that our patrons are using that we know libraries can't easily afford on their own. And so it was a way of letting library staff play with these particular toys and see how they work so they can provide better library services. The other thing the BTOP program has done quite a bit of is it's also actually provided a lot of training, and that's where they've really tried to make sure that they've served all types of libraries, even those who weren't able to personally benefit from the BTOP program in and of itself. And so that program is coming to an end in June of 2013, and State Library staff is looking at what we can continue and maintain and what we might have to give up. So you'll see more information about that in the years to come. So this next one is actually a series of 6 different acronyms. Does anyone know what those are referring to? Any guesses? Yes, Nancy. That is correct. These are all federations, and I am actually going to save this really quickly and click on the map so that you can see what I'm talking about. In Montana, the state was divided up into 6 regions, and this happened in the 1950s. And your public library is a part of one of these federations, and so you can see on this map, you can kind of get a sense of where you might be and which federation you might belong to. And what the federations do is, first of all, they receive state funding, and so you will actually get a check from your federation. And each year, the libraries in that federation, and it's really pretty much the public libraries, come together to decide how they are going to spend the money that the federation receives. And so when your library receives this check, there are certain ways you have to spend the money. But hopefully your director has been a part of the process of deciding how that money is going to be spent, so it's not a surprise and it makes sense for your library. The other thing these federations do provide is kind of regional networking. You get to meet other library directors and trustees in that area so that you can talk with one another about what's going on in your region and your library. Are there any questions about any of the acronyms that we covered or federations in general? Okay, we'll go back to the PowerPoint slide. And are there any other major acronyms that I've missed that you've heard in your libraries that you're wondering, what is this? Okay. Well then, I will go ahead and go forward, and if you think of something, don't hesitate to put it in the chat box. As you can tell, oh, that's a good suggestion, Kathy. I'll come back to that. As you can tell, I try to stop frequently to ask if there are any questions so that this can be as useful as possible. So Kathy brought up that LSTA may be helpful to some of you. Does anyone know what LSTA stands for? You can just type it into the chat box if you would like. And I will add it to my slideshow so that it gets recorded. And this is one you may not be aware of. So not seeing any answers, I'll go ahead and add this one in here. Stands for Library Services Technology Act. And basically, it's federal funding that libraries around the United States receive. All 50 state libraries receive some of this federal funding. It's kind of overseen by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And in Montana, this federal funding is used in a variety of different ways. We use it for positions such as myself. I am actually paid federally. We also use it to help people join the Montana Share Catalog. We use it for a number of our training efforts. We also try to put some of that money into some of the statewide projects, especially as they're getting started. So Kathy, is there anything you would like to add, or Joe, actually, to my LSTA description?
That's as much as I know, so good job.
All right. Any other acronyms before I move on to the next slide? Okay. So basically, I wanted to let you know that there are some resources out there for you as trustees. There's definitely the MSL website. So that is something you can visit. I'm not going to click on it right now because I want to make sure that we have enough time. This link, it's just msl.mt.gov, and you can visit it if you're looking for information about different projects. There's a For Trustees section so that you can take a look at law or some of the other things that are your responsibilities. There is a trustee handbook which is available on that website. We used to have a printed version of this, but in one of our budget cuts, printed materials we had to let go of that. So we are updating the online version of this handbook, and in fact I'm in the process of doing that right now. So if you want the latest version, you can download it from the State Library's website. You also have the 3 statewide library consultants. I, myself, Lauren, and Suzanne are available for you to ask questions or if you need assistance with anything. And if you're not sure which consultant is assigned to your library, just ask your library director, and he or she should be able to tell you. Okay, so the job of the library board. So, what is the job of the board? And I'm hoping you'll help me by completing this in the chat. What are some of the things that you do on the library board? Or if you're a director, what does your library board do? And along with that, I'd actually like to know which duty you find the most difficult. That will be helpful for me in the next 2 sessions in knowing where I should kind of focus my energies.
So Tracy, do you want me to
Okay.
open up everybody's mics now as well, or shall we just use the chat box for this?
Sure, actually. That'd be great.
All right, so everybody's mics are open. If you want to talk, we'll be able to hear you. Anyone?
So Judy has said approve income and expenses and library policies.
I think everybody's too shy to talk, so.
I know, this is a different crowd from the library directors.
They're usually very chatty.
Yeah.
That's okay. Typing is fine too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we have hire director, strategic planning.
Some people are thinking, I thought I came to this course to find out the job of the board.
They probably did. And that's the disadvantage of webinars, is people probably haven't been to one of my sessions and don't realize that I do try to make it interactive. And I am going to share. I just had a feeling that we had some people on here with experience that could share their own knowledge. So a couple more seconds, and then I will actually talk about the job of the board. Does anyone want to add anything? Okay. I will go ahead then. So if you could just mute them. Looks like you already have, Joe. Thanks. Okay. So I will go ahead and pull up the different duties of the board. And this is directly from the trustee handbook. And basically, the first one on here, Gretchen mentioned this, and it's budgeting. And this is actually a special duty that most library boards have. Not all of your boards might have this. In Montana, we have different types of library boards. Some boards are what we call governing, meaning that they can adopt a library budget and present it to their local governing body. Some of you may actually be on an advisory board where you might see the budget, but actually your city or your county, or if you are a school community library, perhaps the school board kind of presents you the budget. And you may have some input on it, but you don't actually adopt the budget. The difference in my mind is governing can adopt, advisory just kind of can advise in essence. So adopt and review the budget is one of your duties. Planning, I saw that Sandy mentioned strategic planning, which is great to see. For me, this one can include that kind of long-term planning where you think about where you want to be 5, 10 years down the road. It can also be much more short-term. So what do you want to accomplish in the next year? Or what do you need to do for your technology or different programs and services in the library? I don't remember, I think I saw policies. I think Judy might have actually said approved library policies. And this is an important duty of the board, is setting policy for the library, usually while working with the director. And you have a responsibility to hire the director, and you also are expected to evaluate him or her. And I put in parentheses, evaluate the library, because I think this is an important job of the board and the director, is to take a look at how the library is doing. And then the last two are kind of interesting ones. The library board to me is a bridge, and it definitely, you as library board members should be talking about the library and what it can do for people, but you have an obligation to talk about your community and making sure that your community gets the services it needs. And so if you are aware of some portion of your community that isn't receiving library services, you should bring that up so that you and the other board members and the director can discuss that and how the library might be able to serve those folks. And then finally, you're kind of expected to understand the law. This is not being a lawyer or anything like that. What we're talking about is knowing enough about things like the open meeting law or the powers and duties of library board members that you can not get yourselves and the library into trouble. So does anyone have any questions about the job of the board? I promise I really don't bite.
She doesn't. But we also will, if a question comes up, jot it down, and we will definitely have time at the end of the session for Tracy to answer any particular questions you have.
Absolutely, and you can also send me an email or give me a call as well. I myself, when I'm attending these webinars, I will confess I tend to lurk more than I talk, so I understand others might be the same as me. They're not totally comfortable using chat to ask questions. So just know that if you're more comfortable emailing me or calling me, you can feel free to do that. So I'll just wait a few more moments and then I'll switch to the next slide.
And I should add that if you hover over Tracy's name in the attendee list, it'll actually show you her email address. And that's true of everybody who's registered today and attending today.
Okay, so seeing no questions, I will go ahead and go back. And so if you will for me, in the chat box, tell me what's the role of the individual trustee and how do they relate to the library board? Does anyone have any words of wisdom on this one? And I realize this is a tricky question, but it actually does come up and can be the source of conflict on library boards or within libraries.
Judy has said attend monthly meetings.
Okay. Thank you, Judy. That is correct.
Does anyone else have a sense of what your role is supposed to be as an
Oh,
individual trustee? Oh, an active participant. They're
that's
actually,
thank you, Nancy. That's
and
actually one of the things I'm going to mention.
she has several folks sitting with her in Wadsworth Library, so it's Nancy and company.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
I think the second part of that question is interesting too, how the individual relates to the board. Oh, there you go. Federation meetings after appointed.
Yep. That's right. And for those of you who might not be aware, because I know we have some really new trustees on this webinar, a lot of libraries actually kind of pick one of the trustees, an individual trustee, to be kind of the Federation representative, and that person goes to Federation meetings. To be knowledgeable of ethics and privacy issues, yep. And we'll actually talk about that in a lot more detail when we talk about law. It's a good one, Rick. Anything else?
And Tracy, those trustees at the Federation meetings have a special role because they're the voting
Yes.
members, right?
Yes, that is correct, Joe. In federations, the law gives public library trustees kind of the voting power. And the reasoning behind that is because we are dealing with money. And the library board's the one responsible for the money, basically, is what it comes down to. And so we really like trustees to come to Federation meetings because of that particular issue. As well as Federation meetings are a great way to find out about what's going on in the Montana library world and what might impact your library in particular. Okay, so I will go ahead and put up my answers to these questions. And this is how I describe this when I am teaching this session. And I bring up the individual trustee thing is because sometimes the reason it causes conflict is because an individual trustee doesn't realize that the power lies with the library board as a group. And so when I define the library board in my own brain, I just kind of say the board's the queen bee, the individual trustees on it are the worker bees. So the things that Rick and Sharon and Judy all mentioned, as well as Nancy and company, that's what we're talking about with the worker bee. That as an individual trustee, you show up, you do your homework, you read your materials for your board meeting, you come prepared with good questions, and you share your feedback. And then all 5 of you together make a decision when necessary to adopt a policy or adopt the budget. The authority definitely rests with the board, and by law, the board is the only one who can make a decision. So even if I were a trustee, for instance, at a public library, and I felt strongly about a policy issue, if my other 4 members feel differently, then that's the way it goes. And I, as an individual trustee, I kind of have an obligation to support that. And obviously, if it's illegal or unethical, that's a different issue. But if it's simply a case of you as an individual trustee disagree with the final decision the board made, you should still support it publicly. And if you can't, then you need to get off the board because the board does eventually need to speak with one voice. And this has to do, I think, with as much just making it clear to library directors and staff and the public that you support the library and you support the decisions of the board and believe that everyone's operating to the best of their ability. So that's a key thing to keep in mind. A lot of times where I see this become a sticky issue is actually in the evaluation of the director, because that's tricky to do. Each individual trustee is kind of giving their input on the library director and his or her performance. But the bottom line is the board has to come to an agreement about what they think about the library director's performance, and they have to speak from that place as being a board, not as being individual members. So does anyone have any kind of thoughts or questions?
Judy posted, but is not every trustee part of the board?
Yep, they are. Absolutely. But what I am saying is the board is all of the trustees coming together. I don't know, does that help answer your question, Judy? Is that?
So they get to have, they obviously, you want your board members to have an opinion and a voice and to be actively participating in the formation of policy, but but the final policy is a group decision.
Yes.
So she said she didn't see the difference in that last statement.
Yeah, and that's a hard one. This is a hard one for me to describe, but the way I think of it is I come as an individual trustee and I give my input on the policy, and then the five of us make the final decision on that policy, and that's the board versus the trustee. So, oh, that's kind of an interesting analogy, Sean. I like it.
It's what the public sees
Any
from
other
the
thoughts?
board.
For those of you who are more experienced trustees, if you have a new trustee on, how do you try to explain this? Because basically the concept I'm trying to get at is individual trustees can't make decisions for the library. The board has to make decisions for the library. So I'm curious if the more experienced trustees out there have kind of a great way of describing this to a new trustee so that it makes sense. And I'm actually going to write your thoughts down, Sean, because that is a good one. All right. Any thoughts before I... Oh, so I'm glad to see that you give them a new packet, Judy. That's good. It's important to make sure those new trustees are brought up to speed. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and switch to the next slide. So let's talk about the board and the library director. How do they relate? How would you explain this to your trustees? So if you just say in chat, and if you want, you can even just say, for instance, the board does this and the director does that. But how would you kind of explain what the board does versus what the director does to a new trustee?
It always takes just a little more time to have a discussion this way because people have to think a little bit about it and then put their thoughts down, and then if they're like me, they have to correct all the typos and then send it out. So here's from Judy. The director oversees the operations of the library and then reports on those to the board.
Yeah, that's a good one. Do we have any other brave souls out there? Okay, Sean. Board is involved in the creation of budgets, policies, etc., and the director implements those decisions? Yep. Director recommends to the board?
From Kathy.
Director, day-to-day activities, board higher level activities? Yes. Any other thoughts? Okay. I will go ahead then and bring
There's one from
up my
Wordsworth.
answers on this slide.
The board relies on the director to steer the board in the right direction. We expect her to be knowledgeable so the board can do their job. So
Yep.
She's describing very much a back and forth kind of.
Yes, and I think that's the key thing. And as you look at this slide, you might notice that some of the board role and duties are the same as the director role and duties. from things like planning for the future of the library, I think that's something that has to be done jointly. Because in many cases, the library director is out there on the front line seeing things and has really valuable input to give to the board on planning for the library. And I think that's also true. And what I saw in the list here, as many of you said, the director kind of handles the day-to-day management and then reports back to the board and assists them in sort of making different decisions. At the very bottom, you'll see it says board governs, director manages. One of the trustees I work with quite a bit said, this is what I tell my new trustees. And I really liked it, so I wanted to share it with you because I thought that was a great way of describing the difference between what the board does and what the director does. And just being aware of those things. It's really important that the director and the board work together as a team. Because if they work together as a team, then they'll really take the library a long way and the community will get the service that it needs. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions about what you see on the screen here? Then I'll just wait a few moments because I know it takes time to think things through or to type things out. Okay.
I think the bottom of that graphic is pretty
coming.
Yeah, it's pretty good because it's board governs, director manages. That kind of is a nice summary.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, I thought it was a great way of putting it. Okay. So, what did you think of the golden rules? Those of you who had a chance to read it, and for those of you who didn't, I am actually going to put those on the screen so that you can see. I'll just scroll down here.
And you can open up those materials.
What did you think of this?
Yeah, you can click on the plus sign next to the word materials in the control panel, and then you'll be able to view the handout which Tracy gave to you, and then you can just double click on it if you're in a and it'll open it up. So that should work.
Thanks, Joe. Okay, good. Yeah, to be honest, it's interesting that Nancy and company would mention that they're simple, concise, and informative. In many ways, I think these golden rules pretty much sum up the trustee handbook in basically one page. Anything you would add or change? All right. You are a quiet bunch. I'm definitely going to have to change my format next time, aren't I? If you think of anything.
You don't have to threaten them now, Tracy. People are just getting used to this.
They are, and it is pretty different. I know a lot of webinars, they just do presentations, but
now everybody knows they're expected to do their reading ahead of time, so
I know.
Be a quiz.
And I'm hoping that those of you who are able to join us for the next two, you'll feel more comfortable next time using the chat. I just think there's a lot of knowledge and wisdom out there, and sometimes the statements in the chat box can be more helpful than anything I would say, because you are trustees, many of you, and those of you who are directors, you have experience working with trustees, so you have a lot of good knowledge and wisdom you can share with the rest of us that will help us do our jobs better. So hopefully it can help you feel more comfortable, and at least now you're kind of used to the setup that I have. So I will go ahead and go back to my PowerPoint. And I'll just take this moment to see if there are any questions. And then I also would like to know if you want to kind of continue sort of the online learning through the use of a Facebook group or a Google Circle, or we have a new learning portal at the State Library where I can post this information. And if you're not interested, that's quite all right. If you just kind of indicate in the chat box, would you like me to set something up where you can go get the resources, maybe ask questions or talk to your fellow attendees? And if you're interested in that, you can let me know and let me know what works best for you. If you're not interested, that is perfectly okay. You are all very busy people. And if you feel more comfortable, you can just send it to me directly. And you do that by clicking the downward pointing arrow beside all entire audience and just select my name. And while you're doing that, if you'll just let me know if you have any questions. Jennifer, there actually is a Facebook page for MSL. We find actually that it's being used by just library lovers, so that's somewhat changed the way we use that. At this point, there is not a page for trustees, but that is something I could create if that's most useful for people. Any other thoughts on this one? Would love to have a page for trustees. Okay. And should I say Nancy and Company?
Tracy, you want me to run this as a poll real quick? I have one here.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Joe. That might be easier and more comfortable for people.
All right. So this will allow you to kind of vote a little bit, anonymously.
Yes.
So
sometimes that's what
you'll have a choice here. You should be able to see it now. Do you see it, Tracy? Want to join an online group to continue the discussion? You can click in the little circle to the left there. And I can see that we've had about half the people have voted, a little more than half. And I can show you the results as we get a couple more votes in there. Looking for, looks like about, we have the undecideds again. I thought we got over that yesterday. Okay, let me close the poll and then I can show it to you. So you should be able to see it now.
And I actually can't see it.
Give it just a second. Sometimes
okay.
It takes a minute. I can tell you what the answers are. It's about a third say no thanks, but then there were another third said Facebook would be great, and another third would like private online space. So we don't have real consensus here. So
okay.
Maybe if we went with the private online space, we could meet 2/3, because then the Facebook people could get there. I will go ahead and set that up in the next week or so, and we'll see how it works out between now and the next session.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Okay. So then I will go ahead and change this slide, and I'm actually just asking you to take some time to reflect, because I am a trainer at heart, and trainers always kind of want some sort of change to have come from a session that they taught. And I just would like you to, and you don't have to report this back to me, this is just for you privately. I'd like you to take some time to think about how your library board is doing when it comes to the job of the board, and what you could do differently and or improve in the different duties that you have to complete as a trustee and as a library board. And if you feel comfortable, this is a great thing for the board as a whole to talk about. But if not, then what can you do personally to improve things? And of course, as anyone would tell you, that's actually where you have change happen. No matter how hard we try, we can't get anyone to do something unless they want to do it. And so what you choose to do personally is actually the most powerful thing you can do. So as you answer these questions, maybe there's something that you think, I could do that differently. I could be better about doing my homework before the board meeting, or I could be better about speaking up, because a lot of you have really great ideas, and it would be wonderful if you shared them. The library would be better off if you did so. So this is just something I'm hoping you will take the time to do after this session and throughout the days, to just reflect on what you learned and what you might like to change. All right. Any thoughts on this one or questions before we come to the last few slides? Okay.
Hey. We'll move on.
So our next our next session, we're going to be looking at, I call it developing relationships, but that's that advocacy for the library and the community question. We're going to do the brief overview of important laws, so that ethics and privacy issue that I think it was Rick brought up, about expectations of trustees. We're actually going to talk about those things. And then we're going to take a brief look at the financial side of things. And, basically, I'm just going to spend roughly 15 minutes on each of these topics. So we're not going to be able to go into a lot of detail. But the hope is that out of this, we'll get some ideas from you, maybe on particular sessions that you'd like a lot more information. This is just to give you a taste of some of the particular duties of the board. The homework for the next session is, I'd like you to think about a relationship you want to build or improve. And that can be internal. Maybe you want your board to work together as a team. Maybe you want to have a better relation with the director. It could also be external. Maybe you need to have better relations with your city council or your county commission, or maybe your friends of the library or a library foundation. You get to pick. It's whatever is going to be most useful and relevant to you. And I'd like you to think about how you would go about either improving that relationship, if maybe it's not going so great, or how you would start the relationship. And think about what you've done in the past. The experiences you have personally, or even maybe as a volunteer on other boards or professionally, think about that. Think about what you've learned in your own life about relationships, because a lot of that's going to apply to developing better relationships on the board. And for those of you who've maybe been through this process, either in the library field or outside of it, what advice would you give others? Okay, and I thought we'd start our next session with a discussion of that particular issue. And so Jennifer had a question about, is there a way to print out my slides? And I think we are going to have that available. Is that right, Joe? It will be in a PDF?
It will be posted in the materials, so you'll get an email. And actually, I'm going to be sending you all a follow-up email in a few days as soon as I have this session, the recording posted. So you'll be able to go back and review that if you want, but I'll also send out a PDF of the slides at that time. So you'll get an email, and it'll also be posted in the materials for the course. So there should be two places to get it. And as soon as we get this online sessions place set up for us to continue this discussion, you'll get another email from me. So expect a few emails from me. Not too many, probably 2 in the next couple weeks.
Thanks, Joe. Is there any questions about the homework for the next session?
They're all thinking. That's good. You did ask them to think.
I did. That's a big hope of mine. Well, I want to thank you for your time today. And here's my contact information if you didn't get it off of the resting your mouse over my name. And I believe Joe said that we would stop the recording. So if any of you feel more comfortable, you can actually ask your questions outside of the recorded archive. And I will stay online for a few more minutes.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. So for those who've joined us in the recording, thank you very much.